So for today, we're going to start with a Q&A because this week was quite content heavy. And so we want to be able to give you an opportunity to ask questions and for us to be able to address your needs as you work through the material. We're also going to go over some audio editing and recording troubleshooting. We're going to look at a review of single entry uploads, and then we're also going to look at batch uploads. I have a sneaking suspicion that we may not get through all of that today, but we do have individual videos on most of these topics that we can direct you to after the fact. So we will see how we do. So Q&A, thinking back to this week, we had our regional team meetings where we focused a lot on language gathering and talked a bit about the technical side of using firstvoices.com. We had our check-in that focused more on using firstvoices.com and custom categories and some other features. And then your assigned readings also covered a lot of the specifics of recording. And hopefully you were able to think about what your processing and workflow will look like for your First Voices project this week. So how are we feeling about the processes that were covered this week? For those of you who it was new, or even for those of you for whom it was review, what's a new thing that you learned this week? Maybe thinking about Bridget's demos from Wednesday. Was there something new that came up that you were like, oh, hey, I hadn't thought about doing things that way, or I hadn't realized I could do that on the site? Was there something that came up? Vera, go ahead.
Yeah, I forgot. Oh, I forgot that reports were a thing, so that I can look back and see what entries are missing pictures or what entries are missing audio. So that was a really cool reminder.
Awesome. Yeah. Reports are super useful, and that's one feature that we're hoping to make updates to in the next year. So you might see some changes in how that works, but definitely useful, and we're hoping to continuously make it more useful. Jaden says in the chat, I learned about batch uploads on Audacity, and that saved me quite a bit of time. So that's a little bit confusing of a statement for me, Jaden. Batch uploads usually refers to the process of like writing up your entries in a spreadsheet and then uploading them to our SharePoint so that we can automatically upload, multiple entries for you at a time. But you're saying batch uploads on Audacity. Are you talking about batch exports of labels? Or are you talking about batch uploads to the site? Batch exports of labels. Awesome. Yes, and Ben also points out in the chat that the title of the slide says week 2, but we are indeed on week 3. This is not the halfway point. If this was the halfway point, Ben and I might cry.
Is time linear? Who's to say?
If anyone is feeling a little bit tired at the end of this week, as Ben and I are, I will reassure you that week 4 is indeed a little bit lighter than the previous 3 weeks. So it will feel like a breath of fresh air to ease us out of heavy training mode. Marlene, your hand is up. Go for it.
Yeah, so with the First Voices, I've noticed, because we did the project last year and we're still trying to complete the, well, it is completed, but we're still adding stuff to it, right? It has become very easy, user-friendly compared to what it was before. And Ben has done a great job upgrading and Bridget, I know, it's, I find First Voices as very user-friendly compared to what it was last year and the upgrades. So I just want to throw that in there because it's a lot easier to understand, to use now compared to what it was before. So I just want to throw that out there.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Thank you so much. And for folks who have, feedback like that or more critical feedback as well, I'll mention right now that after training, we will be distributing a survey. And the survey really helps us know what we can do better next year and what better upgrades we can make to the site and stuff like that. So that with that kind of feedback, it would be super awesome if when we distribute that survey, you could write some of those thoughts down for us. It helps us really advocate to our managers really for when we need to make improvements, to have it written down by you. So just a little preemptive push that when we distribute that, it would be really awesome if we could get your thoughts there as well. We have some stuff going on in the chat. So Cass says, it was a good refresher this week and I felt that it went well. I like the idea of creating a how-to book for any new staff or just a book of tips to keep on hand. That is a great idea. And we're happy to assist you with things like that. And I know that some folks as well have been printing out parts of the knowledge base for their team and keeping like a booklet of knowledge base articles that are particularly helpful to them. So you're always welcome to print out the knowledge base articles or any of the training materials that we distribute. If that's helpful to you in creating your booklet, please be our guest. Kathleen says, I enjoyed learning about the tips for audio recording, like putting a barrier between your microphone and the table to reduce background noise. Yeah, I mean, there's so many little great hacks or little DIY tips for how to make audio recording work really well in the setting that you're in. And we'll talk about that a bit more today. And it's something that I always get really jazzed about, actually. I find it really fascinating.
Peter, oh, sorry, Peter, and then Marlene, your hand's also up. So if you want to add more, please feel free to go after Peter.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, the concept of using meta edit. One question I had, was there any way where two or more people can use meta edit and sort of update things? It seems though that you can only really have one thing going at a time, meaning that you've got the subdirectory on your computer with all your files, and then you start editing them. I don't know if you can somehow use some kind of a shared drive or something so that you can all kind of work on it at the same time.
Yeah. Kira, is it okay if I take this one?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. And at first I was like, oh, I don't want to disappoint. Yeah, live editing or collaborative editing doesn't work on BWF meta edit, but we definitely do recommend that once you have a larger amount of files, especially preservation masters, access masters, so the ones that will really be the jumping off points for what you might put onto First Voices, that you do keep them in a shared location. And so we talked a little bit about that, and we'll talk more. And it's a really large conversation of where we want to host or back up, and we'll talk and see what other folks are doing next week about that. But that's generally a really good practice, especially as you start to get more and more files. And because the checksums, they stay with the file, you'll be able to view any of the changes very easily as long as you all have BWF meta edit or something that could read the type of checksum. Yeah. But kind of additionally, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, usually, I'm Kira, you might be able to verify this as well, but it tends to be that only one or two folks do a lot of the BWF meta editing. In general with projects, it kind of just happens that way. There's usually one person that's just like, oh, this is actually coming really naturally to me. I can do it. But definitely at least having, making it accessible for the whole team to use, the really high quality, secure files is a must.
Yeah, I've usually seen it that there's one person who's really appointed. That seems to work for most people's workflow, but definitely we would encourage you to tailor the process to what's going to work best for your team. And if you have any interesting developments in how you make that work, we would love to hear it so that we can share that with other folks who might have similar workflow needs. Chantal has said in the chat, for this week, I enjoyed the equipment discussions and the reminders of different types of mics and recording devices that are out there, as well as the tips for file naming for master versus Word and edited sound files. If anybody is looking for more information on the types of mics and stuff that we recommend, we do have articles on the First Voices knowledge base that have videos and detailed description of the different types of equipment. So if you want to review that information, it is there and accessible to you in a couple of different formats, so both written and video. Marlene, do you have something that you'd like to add at this time?
No, just a question about administration for the website. Is there only the one administrator, or is there two administrators?
You can appoint as many administrators as you'd like, theoretically.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, all you have to do is let us know who you would like assigned as administrator. For workflow purposes, we find 1 to 2 administrators is best, but whatever works best for your team and your workflow is fine by us.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions from folks before I move into some more structured content?
I like Caroline's comment too. I feel like it should be explicitly mentioned. This week, Phoebe far less terrified to open a box from Long and McQuaid. That's good. That is wonderful to hear. We definitely want to get folks familiar and de-stress them from this idea of techie work is just for techies. It's for everybody because we all have the capacity to grow and learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're trying to make this stuff as accessible as possible. But we're also not going to deny that it's daunting. I remember the first time that somebody put an external recorder in my hands and was like, hey, sit with this elder and record this precious data and make sure you do it correctly. It was terrifying. And we aren't going to pretend like it isn't a lot of pressure, but at the same time, it's very doable. Yes, Grant says what he really means is it's easy for techies, but it can be possible for anyone with practice. That's absolutely true. Absolutely. Okay, so speaking of techie stuff, I have some recording hacks for you today. So I guess our first question is, has anybody played around with their recorders since we met earlier this week? Has anybody gotten stuff out of the box and turned your devices on to see what's what? Any interesting experience? I've got a thumbs up. I assume that means yes, someone did that. The thing is, when we get those thumbs up icons across the screen, I can't see who put that up, so. Chantal has a hand up. Go for it, Chantal.
Yo, yeah, the session that we had this week, we actually had one of our linguists, our only linguists in the community this week. So we managed to open the recordings, the Zoom H4n recording devices, and take them out for a spin carefully with one of our speakers. So it was like an informal but formal recording session to use. However, I think using these a bit more in the future for producing more sound files with the teams in office will definitely be one of our sort of next steps in terms of just practicing with the recording devices themselves. It's been a bit of a busy week, I guess, is where what I'm trying to get at here, but it's a good question. So thanks for asking that one, Kira.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for letting us know. Anybody else do the same thing as Chantal and the team there in Clem 2? Have kind of an informal session just to kind of get your feet wet and dip your toes in? Well, perhaps if it's something you're going to be doing soon, it might be useful for me to share with you some of my DIY tips for studio spaces. So I'm not going to pretend that these photos look professional and well put together. This is a little mini studio space that I set up in the corner of a closet with the bedding that my sister left here after she moved out of my apartment after she quit her job and moved back home during COVID last year. So this was happening amidst much chaos, and if it looks that way, then the truth simply is showing. But I think a lot of the sort of principles of what I've done here to set up like a good quality recording space in a spare bedroom in an apartment in the middle of Victoria, I think might be helpful for folks who might be setting up impromptu recording spaces. So the first thing you'll notice in the left-hand side there is, given that I live in a tiny little apartment with bad overhead lighting, the first thing that I did was turn off the overhead lights and bring in a standing floor lamp. The overhead lights create a buzz, and I'm able to tune it out as a human when I'm in the room, but I definitely noticed it on the recording. So it was one of those moments where I realized, oh, I had to go back after I did my first test recording. I realized when I listened to it back, I had to go back and redo it because of the buzz from the overhead light. So a good example of why doing a test recording is important and why having lamps on standby is also important. Now, looking at the second and third pictures, you might be wondering, what the heck? Why are there sheets and blankets pinned to the wall? That is because flat walls do not make for good recording environments. Flat, hard walls bounce sound waves back at the recorder, and they can create almost like a fuzzy sounding or an echoey sort of sounding recording, depending on the exact quality of what you're working with. So you'll see that over the hard edges of the door and then directly behind the microphone, I'd hung some sheets. And they're not hung especially well, but the thing is, they don't actually need to be. They just need to be hung so that the spots where the sound is likely to bounce back, so directly where I was speaking at, that it was dampened a little bit. Now this is of course different because I was just recording audio to go behind trading videos. So it was just me staring at the wall, reading off of my phone. But of course, if you're recording with a speaker, you might have to think a little bit differently about, okay, which way is the chair going to be facing? Where is the microphone going to be facing? And where are those sound waves likely to be bouncing off? So usually what I recommend to folks is to pay attention to hard corners in the room. So to hang blankets over the 90-degree corners in the room, if your speaker is going to be speaking out towards the room, or rolled up rugs can be put in the corners of rooms as well. Also, spare mattresses, if you have them, work well for that kind of thing. But of course, spare mattresses aren't necessarily something everybody has kicking around. But inflatable mattresses work well as well. Gym pads, yoga mats, those kinds of things are good for dampening corners. And then in the last photo, I don't know if you can tell, but those are windows behind that blanket and pillowcase there. And I actually just hung them up with thumbtacks. So they were simply just temporarily affixed to the wall with thumb. Sorry, I just saw Grant's message in the chat. He says, if possible, get the elder to record under a heavy blanket. One of the best recording hacks for high quality recordings. Yes, I'm sure every elder loves having a duvet thrown over their head while they're trying to record.
We could all build blanket forts.
Yeah, Linguistics 101, blanket forts.
Leave it to Grant.
So yeah, the reason why we're focusing on this right now is really just because COVID is an ongoing reality, and you're likely recording in homes or helping folks set up recording spaces in their homes. But these hacks can also be useful during not COVID times. So for example, when I was doing dictionary work with the Gixan community, we didn't have a set recording space out there where folks were coming to us to record. It was us going to folks' homes. And so every time when we would go into someone's home to record, if it was possible, we would make some small adjustments to the space that they were allowing us to record in to try to minimize any issues that we might have with the quality of the sound. Now, all of that being said, yes, it is absolutely best to set up an ideal recording space in someone's home, but there are things that you can do in the sort of post-production in Audacity to mitigate some of those issues if you're not able to eliminate them in the recording stage. So yeah, a controlled recording environment is best, but there are things that can be done if it's not possible. Before we move on to that and what can be done to clean up your audio, are there any questions about DIY studio spaces? Any other hacks that folks would like to offer? One other hack that I wanted to share actually is about pop filters. So the pop filter in the center image is the thing that's, hovering in front of my microphone. And what this does is eliminates interference from like breathy sounds from our voices, from our mouths when we're speaking at a microphone. And these are sounds that usually wouldn't be heard in normal speech. But when that pop of physical air hits the microphone directly, it creates like a wind sound that isn't actually part of the natural speech. So I've just linked an image there of what a pop filter looks like, because I don't have a picture to explain the hack that I'm going to describe. But what you can do if you don't have a pop filter on hand, or if your pop filter breaks, because they are actually oddly easy to break, is you can make an impromptu one out of a wire hanger and a pair of pantyhose. So you may have noticed that the pop filter, those fabric ones, they have kind of a double wall of of fabric on either side, and you can create the same thing if you bend a wire hanger into a circle and put one leg of a pair of pantyhose over that circle. It creates the same kind of physical barrier. So that works really well. And then if you need to come up with like a impromptu mic stand to rig it to, I recommend zip ties and a mop handle. And then the mop handle can be zip tied to a chair, and the pop filter can be zip tied to the mop handle. It's a very sort of step-by-step DIY hack. But if your equipment breaks or if you don't have access to a mic stand and a pop filter, 12-year-old Kira was building mic stands in her bedroom trying to record her debut album with all of these DIY tricks. So if you need help setting up your DIY studio space, or if something breaks and you need to know what to do, I'm your girl. I've probably fixed it before.
Some interesting conversations in the chat that I can read out and provide some other context to. So Chantal asks, one for Stuart first, I guess, is creaky chairs and soft pads under feet, definitely. And Chantal asked about batch uploads, which we'll talk about a little more in detail, but asking what kind of timeline to send. I put a brief statement in the chat too, but we'll get to that as well. For Jade, and a small hack too, having a warm drink for the outer/speaker clears and warms up the vocals beforehand, so there is less distortion or smacking sound with the audio. Yes, this is why we like tea when we're kind of sick as well. And on the reverse side, something that isn't super helpful is lots of sugar and chocolate. This can make it a little more difficult in pronunciation at times. It turns out it constricts some of the chords. And so with on kind of administrative end with studio spaces, if you, for example, would like to get some blankets, maybe a few mop handles, some good lamps that can be safely distributed. If you do want to make little DIY studio space packages to provide to outers and other people that might be helping record, that is totally an okay budget expense. So if you need to rework that again, let us know and we'll help you out there.
Definitely. Okay, that was productive. I enjoyed that. And let's go into something else that I will also enjoy. You can see I'm getting very enthusiastic, or you can hear, I hope, that I'm getting very enthusiastic. Audio editing and recording, and just like, always been my jam. So we're going to go through a few different audio editing skills. So the 5 skills that we tend to focus on are deleting segments, generating silence, noise reduction, normalization, and compression. And I'm going to move towards actually just showing you how to do this in Audacity rather than explaining it while it's on the screen. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be distributed for your team members who might have missed it today. We do also have, for this particular set of skills, we do have a detailed video or series of videos on the knowledge base as well under the audio editing article. So I recorded this earlier. And for good file management, before I start editing, I'm going to make sure that I save my project. Now, I recorded this directly into Audacity, so the very first thing I should be doing is actually exporting and saving my untouched master file. For time's sake today, I'm actually just going to save the project and keep going. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to do is delete a segment. So I know that there is a part towards the end where I stuttered and repeated myself. So I'm just going to find that. I'm going to listen with my ears. Here. So I stuttered on this word and then repeated it. So I'm going to delete this mispronunciation. And so what I did to select it was I clicked in front of it, I dragged to the end of it, and I let go. And now I'm just going to hit backspace. The next thing I'm going to show you is generating silence. So this is useful when you are doing word lists where you're asking for repetition for learning purposes. So say I have here repeated the same word 3 times, but in between these two, I want more of a gap so that when learners are listening, they have a bit of a pause between the repetitions. So I can go generate at this top menu here and then silence, and then I can choose a number of seconds. And I usually do 0.5 seconds increments, and I'll add more if I feel like I need more. But now you can see that that's just been added. And this is a great time to show you the undo button because that was for demonstration purposes and I don't actually want it. The undo button is up here. And I can click undo, and as it's suggesting, you can also use the hotkey Control-Z. Okay, so that was deleting segments and generating silence. Next, I'm going to show you noise reduction. Now, earlier in the week at our regional meetings, I remember that we talked about taking what we called a silence sample at the beginning of your recording, and I'm about to show you why. So when I press play, I would encourage you to keep your eyes on this toggle up here, or this monitor up here in the top right, because it is going to light up green, which will show you that this silence is not actually silence. There is actually a good amount of background noise because although it is quiet, when I was recording, I had on a fan and I have my windows open and there's traffic outside. So although you can't really hear it with our naked human ears, the program sure hears it. And when somebody is listening through headphones, it is likely to be much louder than what we're noticing right now. So I'm going to press play. Keep your eyes on that monitor bar. And you can see that there is a good amount of static. So what I'm going to do is select that silence sample. I'm going to take a big, long click and drag selection before I start speaking. And I'm going to go to the effect menu at the top here, noise reduction. And I'm going to say get noise profile. And in this moment, what the program does is basically takes an acoustic measurement of that background noise that we just listened to. There is more science there and we can talk about it more. But for now, I'm just going to say that's what the program's doing. It's measuring that background noise. So get noise profile. Now what I'm going to do is select everywhere where I want to take that background noise out. For me, that's the whole track. So I can select the whole track 2 ways. I can go here and say select, or I can do Control-A. All right, I'm going to go back to the effect menu, go back to noise reduction, and I'm going to say OK, because it's already taken the noise profile, so I'm going to say OK. And you can see a little bit that fuzziness from around the speech waveforms reduced. So if I go back, you'll see it grow a little bit. And if I do it again, you'll see that fuzziness reduced again. And now if I play from the beginning and we watch the monitor in the top right hand, you'll see there's much less disruption here. And if you do have a lot of background noise, you can do noise reduction multiple times, but I would caution against it because the more times you do it, the more likely it is to result in distortion on the actual voice. So except for in extreme circumstances, I wouldn't recommend doing noise reduction more than once.
We have some chatter in the chat.
Yeah.
Grant's mentioning the residue box, so there's the difference between reduce and residue. And then Stuart is mentioning have found that fade in and fade out is handy to improve overall audio quality of recording when generating silence, so sounds more natural. I also use this. And yeah, it is quite nice. And Grant says he's kidding about residue box. You don't want to use residue. Correct. Would we want to talk about I like talking about some of the boxes that are kind of odd, that we don't want to touch, or we could not?
Yeah, I don't usually talk about them more beyond saying, don't touch them.
Perfect. Yeah, so the residue will help with like the exact noise that you're filtering, but there is also the preview, which might be helpful.
Yeah, especially if you're going to apply it more than once. Use the preview to determine if distortion is happening. And then if distortion is happening, you usually just hit cancel. My habit, because I don't know, I find it to be just as much or as little work, is just to hit OK and then listen and then use the undo button. Because the preview, like if I click it now,
It loads.
it buffers quite a bit. And then usually you only get a tiny little sample in your preview. You don't hear much. And so I prefer to just hit OK and then go listen to spots that I'm concerned about. I find that better for my personal workflow, but that's totally user preference. Okay, let's talk about normalization now. So when I play the audio, watch the monitor bar and watch where my highest peaks are. We want our highest peaks to be between 18 and 12. We never really want anything to be going anywhere near -6. So let's play and watch.
It's quite Hela. Kiratanasne. Chisalea Sinlea at Matulia.
So to me, that's a bit quiet. We actually want it to be a bit more towards -12. So I would be normalizing to get that up a bit more. So let's see if I go Control A and then you go Effect, Normalize. So how the math here works is kind of tricky, but usually the higher number that I enter here, the louder the sound is going to be. So usually you're aiming to normalize towards -12. So if I enter -12, you might see my peaks are going to grow a bit in that waveform on the page. And now if I listen,
it's quite Hela.
And I watch the monitor bar, I'm happier with that.
At Matulia.
Typically, whether it's too quiet or too loud, normalizing to -12 will work. Now, that was an example of what to do if it's, too quiet. But what if it's too loud? Well, you basically do the same thing, but let me normalize and make it too loud. And then we can, so now you see, oh my God, it's way too loud.
It's quite
What the heck do I do? This is disgusting. I Control A, Effect, Normalize. I enter -12. Oh, that looks much better.
It's quite Hela.
And that I'm in that range where I want to be. Are there any questions about that coming up for folks? Any hands up or anybody in the chat? Because this one tends to be kind of confusing and I'm not sure I always explain it super well.
Grant?
All right. I think this one's I really have to talk about this. This one's really what is there a specific reason why you want it to be so silent? Because essentially I'm talking about this in the sense like if someone's listening to this through their Bluetooth in their car, this is gonna be really quiet versus going up to like -5 or minus. I use -3, and that's usually based on peaks. And this isn't. Oh, by the way, you shouldn't amplify. You shouldn't amplify, but
ideally, yeah.
Yeah, Well, I mean, amplify is like very whatchamacall, but anyways,
It's lossy.
yeah. But I'm trying to understand why you're going so low. Like again, I edit at like a -12, and then once I'm done with the edits, I bump it all the way up to -3 just to get it really loud and clear recording. Well, it's still loud and clear because it's not clipping, right? And on a side note, this is a good example, but you got to get like, I don't know, in the real world, I run into a lot of soft talkers.
Yes.
And soft talkers are probably one of the harder ones to edit. But I just want to hear your thought process behind behind why you want to be at like -15, -12 versus like being up in the -6 even. So it's just something.
-12 is, I was taught that it's like a quote unquote industry standard for spoken audio. So I've been taught that in a couple different domains, in linguistics, in like spoken word production, and in like podcasting. From a few different places, I've been taught -12 is an industry standard. And you're right that we shouldn't amplify, but I mean, it's also interesting because you're talking about editing down around -12 and then amplifying to -3. So that's kind of the same process, right? But I mean, the best thing to do is to record so that you don't have to normalize at all. And so that's why you don't want to be around anywhere past between -12 and -6, because when you get up to -6 is when you're going to start seeing clipping. At least in Audacity, that's the case, and on your Zoom recorders, that's the case. Is -6 is usually where clipping starts. So that's the logic there.
I guess in rebuttal, I just know Audacity so well that all my recordings come out fine at -3. I use -3. I don't go anywhere any further than that. But in the training, at least in my experience, and the training that I've seeked out, actually a lot of it has to deal with the podcasts, and oddly enough, sermons, like religious sites have a lot of stuff on this. Is that kind of normally according to them, roughly -6 to -3 is kind of like where you want to be at the end product. And maybe that's just the change, or I'm not sure, but at least in my experience, having a minus, like anywhere around a -6 is kind of a good is kind of like a good spot, at least for like headphones, and like well, not headphones, but just like having a good amount of sound, like albeit if it's coming from someone's iPad or if it's coming from their phone, because that's where most of the people are going to be listening to what we have. But I don't know. I guess that's just my experience, I guess.
I mean, I think we have the same end goal, which is avoiding clipping. So long as your highest peaks aren't giving you a red distortion on your monitor, you're fine. And it sounds like we just have different approaches to get there.
I think, Grant, you also bring up a good point when you mentioned like kind of the end product. So the different stage of how you're going to use the audio. You both mentioned different places. You might use different kind of standards, or have different expectations of what you might want to hear. So that also plays a bit into how you might want to normalize. Sorry, Peter?
Thanks. This is a really great discussion. And I'm not sure if the effects will do what I'm looking for, but in some of the legacy tapes that we've got, one speaker speaks very quietly and the other speaker speaks more loudly, but it would be nice to be able to, and it's on one track, you might say. So is there any way of normalizing it, or I'm not sure what even the right term is, to kind of squish the audio in such a way that they're both sounding at about the same volume?
Are they recorded in the same track, or are they recorded on two tracks?
No, they're not. I mean, yeah, some of the audio is in stereo, but there's really no differentiation between the two. You know, like we're talking things recorded in the 70s and the 80s where,
Yeah.
you know, there's.
And are they talking simultaneously, or are they talking in kind of call and response?
Yeah, most of the time it's, you know, they're not talking over top of one another. They're just, there's a conversation, or they're, you know, one person's asking a question and the other person's answering, or that kind of situation.
So in that case, it is going to take longer to normalize, because you can't just, you know, whole track select and normalize for one range across. But what I would do is, you know, label, go through which one is which in different portions, and then normalize each section to a comfortable volume so that they're comparable. That would be my approach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that tip.
Grant, too, I think has some thoughts. Any other tips, Grant?
Yeah, I this is actually so specific that this is something I did actually in my first year of working with this, and we actually have we do actually have a document that is sorry, not a document, but we actually have a recording in the exact same sense that he's talking about. Now, for me, I did some edits like long time ago, and after whichever gaining some more experience, I've gone back and re-edited them, and it's fair enough to say that even some of those edits ended up on First Voices because I managed to clean them up so well. Now the only thing that I can caution about that is that there is literally only a finite amount of editing that you can do to old recordings like that, because all the data is already there, and like if you're saying that that one speaker is really soft spoken and then the other one's really loud and clear, that's kind of like it is kind of what it is, unless we get into like some super expensive program, an AI program that's able to like add the extra whatever, clean it up. But on the most part, on that one's kind of like there's only so much you can do to the soft one, and then and whatnot, because really Kyra actually really nailed it on the head earlier. It's like ideally we want to have the best recording we can have before we get to editing. If we have a bad recording before editing, the editing process is going to be that much harder, and it's kind of like there's really not much you can do about that. So legacy, I'll put it like legacy documents such as that, or legacy audio recordings like that, really are a kind of a hard thing to edit and get close to I guess today's standards of quality. I guess that's the reason why it's such a big deal whenever you see these university students taking on big projects where they're trying to restore some sort of audio. It's definitely a longer process, but there's definitely some hacks that you can go through. And one of the ones that that really helped me is actually dialing down the remove noise function effect, and that one's going to be your best friend when it comes to those ones, because really what you're trying to do is get rid of all the old whatchamacallit. But that's sort of the small answer, I guess. I mean, I could go on forever because I actually have the document. I have the Audacity thing, and it's just like I remember how long it took me to actually do it. But it was quite amazing once it was all done. Anyways,
True. Thanks, Grant. Okay, so the last step in quality editing that I'm going to go over is compression. And compression is a final step that you want to do before you export as WAV to control the overall file size of your access files. So I'm going to hit Control A, Effect, Compressor, and this is another one where we are not going to touch anything. We're going to leave all the presets as they are, and ideally when you compress, you're going to see very little changes to your actual waveform, unless you've got really funky normalization going on, in which case, if you see that, you want to go back, do some more careful editing before you compress. So I'm going to hit OK. I saw very little changes, so that's all good. The last thing I'm going to show you is labeling and exporting. So that's what Jaden was talking about in the chat earlier. And that's how you're going to approach exporting your Access Word files. So say this is a word, I'm going to label it. So I can do, edit, labels, add label at selection, or I can use Control B to add a label there. So say this is my word, I'm actually going to enter my label as my intended Word file. So I'm going to write word 1 underscore speaker, which is me, underscore date. I guess I can write the actual date, Sep 24-2021. And I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to do that for all my words. I'm going to just quickly do 3 little examples here so that you can see what I mean when I export. And again, I know I'm rushing through this demo, but I do have a more well-paced demo available on the knowledge base if you want to review this independently later on. So say I've done my whole I've done my whole interview. I've got all my Word files labeled up. Now I'm going to say File, Export, Export Multiple, not export labels. Export labels will literally just export you like a text file that lists the labels you've entered, which could be helpful for like your metadata tracking purposes or something. But in this case, what we want to do is actually export all of the chunks of sound files. So we're going to say export multiple. And now it wants to know where I'm going to put it. So you need to make sure that it is being put in the appropriate location for your file management system. So you can see here it's in my language project demos folder, demo language, Word files. It's going to my intended location for my segmented Word files. So I'm going to hit export. Now it wants to know my metadata. So I'm going to enter the appropriate metadata for this project, and do not enter or do not edit the track title line, because that is going to auto insert your file name for every file, and so the word and the complete file name will be in there. So artist name, I'm just going to enter Kira Borland. Album title, I'm going to say Sinchothan. Oh my gosh, I can't type. Sorry, everybody. Introduction and greetings. I'm going to put the appropriate year and any other metadata that your team has agreed is important. And then hit OK. And it'll ask you to reconfirm for each one. And this is where you might choose to use templates. And there is a more full tutorial on the knowledge base that explains how to use metadata templates. So I'm just going to hit OK for all of it. And then it's going to list each of your files and where they were exported to. And then usually I also will go and do a double check to ensure that they've gone to the appropriate place. So that is the complete process of editing and exporting your edited audio from Audacity. Cass says, when you're labeling, do you need to manually type .wav into the label before export? No. So when you're exporting as WAV, it will automatically add the .wav. But when you are typing into a batch upload, you do need to enter .wav. So in Audacity on your labels, you don't need to enter .wav. When you're typing your file name into your spreadsheet for a batch upload, you do. So let's talk about batching. So batch uploads is the process that we have developed that allows you to upload 50 or more entries at a time. So one thing I'll say right off the bat is the first time that you do a batch upload, we would encourage you to send us about 10 entries so that you can see if you are doing the process correctly. After that, we ask that you do a minimum of 50 entries per batch. This is because it actually takes a little bit of processing time for Bridget and Guy, our dev team, to upload those batches for you. So the process is automated to some extent, but there is still some manual work that Guy and Bridget have to do to move your batches from our SharePoint folder to the actual batch system. So what it is a script or a simple program that our dev team has written that allows you to put a spreadsheet into it and then upload automatically 50 or more entries to your site. Now, there are a couple of things to know about that program. The most important thing to know is that that program is not as smart as a real person. And therefore, if there are any mistakes or inconsistencies in how you enter your information in your spreadsheet, that program won't be able to say, oh, that's a mistake, and here's how I fix it. It will just be able to say, that's a mistake that doesn't compute, and so I reject it. Yeah, Bridget says, I wish it was that smart. If the program was that smart, it would be super easy and everybody could be constantly batch uploading. But it can't automatically correct any consistent errors that are showing up. And what we find is that the first or second time that folks submit a batch, usually there's one or two things that they're confused about, that they've made consistent errors on all their entries. So for example, Cass was asking about entering .wav or .mp3. It does happen sometimes that like the first or second batch that somebody uploads, they haven't entered .wav, and so none of their audio files get uploaded. Mistakes like that are super common, and they're nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about, and we want to help you be able to do effective batches. Cherish says, does upper and lowercase matter for batch uploads? Yes. Whatever you enter is what the system will interpret. So if your words are supposed to all have an uppercase at the beginning of the word for consistency across your site, and you don't enter uppercase, they're going to all upload lowercase. And your file names for your audio files that you have to handwrite into your spreadsheet are also case sensitive. So if your file names are all lowercase and you enter some random uppercase letters into your file names, those are going to not upload correctly. So we have some tips for your batch uploads on the administrative side of things. We have noticed in the last year or so that right before reporting is due, we get a lot of batch uploads because folks are trying to meet their goals. This usually means that we are backlogged with batches around reporting time. And so if that's how you choose to, if that's the timeline that you choose to do your batch uploads on, you may notice that your batch uploads don't get uploaded as quickly. Although the fact that we've received them, of course, can still be noted in your reporting. But ideally, if you send them ahead of your reporting schedule, then it will be easier for both you and I to track what's been uploaded. And speaking of tracking, for those of you who are project coordinators, if your techs are using batch uploads, while the reporting feature on firstvoices.com is useful, it's not super useful for getting exact numbers of entries that have been uploaded within a certain time period. It's a good estimate tool if we don't have another way to track it, and I can help you do that. But if you have batch upload sheets that your techs are using for uploading, that's a much more accurate way to track how many entries have been uploaded or edited. Or no, sorry, not edited, how many have been uploaded. So let's talk about batch uploading a little bit more. I'm going to take us to the knowledge base. So add multiple entries in batches. We do have a lot of resources here. We have an explainer of what a batch is, and we do have this more detailed webinar that I believe was an entire hour and a half where we focused exclusively on giving a detailed tour of how to upload using the batch upload system.
That's not the webinar, Kira. That's the video I made.
That's the video Bridget made.
Yes.
Sorry.
So all good.
Has done a great job of adding this here. We do have a webinar somewhere on the site as well. Anyhow, probably the most useful place for you to be is this video, prepare a batch upload. Not video, article. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, guys. I'm getting tired. I'm running out of steam here. So this is the most useful article, but I will say it is dense. There is a lot of information here, and that's because the batch uploads are what I would call finicky. There are a lot of opportunities to misunderstand or make mistakes that could cause your batch upload to be returned with a lot of errors. And again, that's why we ask you to first send in a test batch of 10 entries if you personally have not done a batch before, so that we can help you assess any errors that you made and help you understand how to avoid those errors in the future.
Can I add one thing, Kira, before you keep going?
Absolutely.
Related to test batches, one thing I'd also like to add is when you send in a test batch, just hold on until we respond and confirm that things are looking good. Because one thing that's happened a couple times is someone has sent in a test batch, and then a couple of days later, once they've sent that in, they're like, well, I sent in my test, now I can send in my full batch, and then they kind of send in their next with 100 words before we got to look at their test batch, and often the mistakes were replicated in the test and then the full batch. So once you send in the test batch, just hold on until you hear back to make sure that there weren't any issues before continuing on in your batching adventures.
I love it, batching adventures. So one thing that I really like to emphasize as well is consulting as a team on what information you want to include with your batch entries before you start compiling them. Reason being, there is a lot of different information that you can include in those batches, from just your basic, entry language information to the extraneous metadata that you might want to include in order to make sure that you've got appropriate metadata in those entries and consistently across your site. So we would really encourage you to have a look at this page on field definitions, because this gives an explainer of the fields for every column on the batch upload sheet. And so we would encourage you to have a look at these field definitions as a team so that you can decide what information and what metadata you are going to add. Another reason why this is really important is because batch editing at this time is not a simple process. That's something that our dev team is looking to create accessibility for in the future, but at this time, that's not something that we're able to offer. So if you decide to do a batch and say you do something like you don't upload sound files, it is then not super possible for us to take a second batch and just add all of those sound files for you. Under most circumstances, you would then be having to go back and add one by one those audio files if that was the decision that your team came to. So it's important to consult as a team on what information and what metadata you want to be uploading with those entries before you go ahead and upload 1,000 words, because nobody wants to be clicking through 1,000 entries to add a part of speech because they didn't realize that their language coordinator expected that of them. So it's important to for everybody to consult with one another to decide what is appropriate. And in some instances, it may also be appropriate to consult with your elder about what information is going up. The other thing we really need to emphasize, because this is where most mistakes happen, that actually cause the upload to fail, is on how you upload your media files. So I'm going to open a template so that I can talk about media files and show you exactly what needs to happen. So this is where you can access all of the templates. So we do have some samples with fake data here, and these are the templates that you would use. And note that there are different templates for words and phrases. It's important that you use the correct template because the headers are different, and our system runs by reading those headers, these headers here. It works by reading them and then interpreting which field on the single entry form those headers go into. I'm just gonna expand this so that we can actually read it. So say I'm entering a word like us, which is dog in Gixan. I'm going to skip pronunciation. Most people usually skip it. And then there are certain fields where you have to enter something exactly as is. So I've actually made a mistake here, for example. If I go to, so for part of speech, you have certain available options. So you have to enter the part of speech exactly as written here. So for example, I thought that for a second, I thought that I would have needed to enter noun with a capital N. It actually has to be a lowercase n. So if I had entered like that, my part of speech would not upload. So it has to be entered like that. And these are the kinds of mistakes that we can catch when you enter, when you upload a test batch. Same thing goes for categories. So you need to enter your category exactly as written on your site. So if you've uploaded a custom category, say if I had animals uploaded as a category and I had it with a capital A, and then I entered it with a lowercase a, or if I entered it as singular, or if I misspelled it, all of these would cause the category to fail to upload with the entry. So it would have to be written exactly how it is on my site.
Can I add one point of clarification, Kira?
Please.
So just so we're all on the same page, when Kira's saying it would fail to upload the category, or it would fail to upload the part of speech or the audio, that doesn't mean that the entry, like that whole entry would be created on your First Voices site just without the part of speech or without the category. The system would detect that one of the fields was incorrect, and it would reject the uploading of that word altogether. This is actually a good thing because if, you know, let's imagine, to Kira's point, you misspell or miscapitalize the category animals. If our system said, oh, okay, we're just not going to add the category, but we're going to add all those words anyways, just without the category, that would require you to then go in and manually add the category. So instead, what the system does is if it detects an error, it just skips the uploading of that particular word. And then at the end of the kind of process, it spits out a spreadsheet of all of the words that got skipped and a reason why for each of them. So when you send a batch in, Often, if there are mistakes and words get skipped, we then send you back a spreadsheet that says, here are the 15 words that didn't get uploaded, and the reason is next to them for each of them. So one of them might say, could not find audio file. One of them might say category not found, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how the system sort of deals with issues that it catches.
Thanks, Bridget. Speaking of audio files, the last thing that I want to get to before we leave off with this demo is the discussion of how to upload audio files with your entries. So this is my basic entry information, right? Ideally, you're going to have a whole bunch more information than this. But I also want to upload an audio file. So there's a few different bits of information that the system is going to ask me for. So the audio title is essentially a usable file name that is viewable by users who are listening to the audio. So I'm just going to write dog, the definition of the word. Audio description, I might write dog spoken by X at X location. And then audio file name. This is the field where we see the most mistakes happening. So say I was using the file that I uploaded or that I got here. So we know that the file was this .wav, right? So I need to enter word1 underscore kbw underscore. Now I'm checking exactly what I wrote so that I get it correctly. SEP24-2021. SEP24-2021.wav, because that is the exact file name that will be attached to the file included in your media folder when you send us your media with your batch upload. If I wrote word space 1 underscore kbw, etc., it wouldn't work. If I wrote word all in caps like that, it wouldn't work. It has to be exactly the correct file name. And that is the most common error that we see returned to us if uploads fail. Now these two are your yes or no buttons. So you can write 1 if it should be shared and 0 if it shouldn't. So I'm going to say this is private. I don't want other dialects to be able to use that audio. So I'm going to enter 0. If it can go in the kids portal, I'm going to enter 1 under child focused. And then source is going to be the speaker. So say it's me. If this person is not already added in the system, it will create a new contributor. If this person is already added, it will just be under that same contributor. But say if I spell the name a little bit different, like I accidentally used 2 Y's, that's going to create a new contributor. So now both of these are going to be contributors in the system. A trick, if you are doing a big sheet of entries all by the same speaker, is to enter it once and then just grab this here, drag it down to copy it down the column. So then you know it's spelled exactly the same each time. And then you would also do the same thing for your recorder. Given the time, I'm going to end there, but I am going to also anticipate that we have some questions. And when it comes to the file naming and all of that in particular, I want to make sure that we address questions. So what thoughts do we have?
I have a question.
Go for it, Grant.
What happens if you end up naming a bunch of audio files the same thing under the audio title?
Then you work with Bridget Chase to the process of fixing that. That is what happens.
Would create chaos. Yeah.
Special processing for his voices. Yeah.
Yes.
And might I add, that is bad metadata management. We'll have a bunch of things named the same thing.
We want unique IDs to be unique IDs.
Problems.
Kira, if there aren't any other questions related to batching, can I add one thing kind of from an administrative perspective about batching?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't remember who brought it up. Somebody in the comments had brought up earlier about timelines. Just want to make the note that as for folks who have already been sending in batches previously probably know, our dev team is really just strapped for capacity right now. And I promise we're doing our best to work through things, but we're trying to sort of maximize capacity by doing batches in batches and kind of processing things as much at once as possible instead of as they come in. And so 2 things. First of all, if you send in a batch and you don't hear back right away, don't panic. We have probably got it, but it's just sitting in our queue and we will get to it. That said, if you don't hear back after like a week or so, feel free to send us an email just confirming, but I will do my best to try and respond at the very least, just letting you know, hey, we got this. It's kind of in the queue to be looked at. And then the other thing is, to Kira's point about the sort of minimum number of words in a batch, it takes us approximately the same amount of time to process a batch with 50 words and to process a batch with 1,000 words. It's like the actual amount of words doesn't really impact the amount of time it takes. So what we ask is, if in your own kind of workflow and planning, if you kind of look at your schedule and say, okay, I'm going to have a batch of 50 words done every single week, we would really appreciate it if it's possible in your workflow to, instead of sending us 4 batches of 50 words like throughout the month, maybe every 2 weeks send us a batch of 100 words, or at the end of every month send us the batch with all 200 words, because it will really save on our sort of admin time of having to process 4 batches versus 1, and then it actually speeds up the process for everyone of having to of processing everyone's batches. Yes, the more the merrier. Big batches, again, as long as you've gotten the approval of that test batch of like, hey, we all kind of know all of the tips and tricks and that there's no big mistakes, feel free to send a big batch. 600 word batches, yeah, why not? Again, as long as we're all good, then we're all good. The more entries, the merrier. The other last thing is, as a reminder for those who haven't sent in batches before, we do have a system now where we will create you a SharePoint folder for your specific team, where you can put all of your batch files in, and then you just email us letting us know that they've been added and what the sort of like title of that folder is for that batch, so that we don't have dozens of emails with audio files everywhere attached in different places and spreadsheets flying around. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Grant. So on that page that Kira mentioned related to the batch system, we have info on that page about the sort of admin process of how to get your SharePoint set up, and like what we would really appreciate it if you would name your emails and files and stuff as, just so that it's easy for us to stay organized and keep on top of things, especially when we're getting multiple batches a day. It really helps us out, kind of keep track and not lose anything in the inbox. So yes, that page is a super important read. Kira's posted it in the chat. And on that page, there is the section that is about how to actually send us the batch. It's under the section send to the First Voices team for processing, and has info about how to format, like a name your media file spreadsheet, and how to add it to the SharePoint and as such. And if anyone has sent batches but can't find their SharePoint link, just shoot me an email and I can get that link for you, no problem.